good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where this finds you, and a warm welcome to this fourth webinar in a series of events that UNIDIR is organising with our colleagues in UNODA and the Friends of the Chair and the Chair. These webinars are intended to support ongoing activities of the BWC Working Group and to stimulate thinking and discussion on some of these important topics during the intersessional period. You can find more details on past webinar series, past events in the webinar series through the link that my colleague has now shared in the chat. And from the outset, I should make clear that this event is being recorded, and we will make that recording available online in the coming days. Today, we're going to focus our discussion on the issue of BWC compliance and verification. And we're really hoping to use this as an opportunity to take stock of the discussion on verification and compliance in December last year, and to look ahead to the forthcoming discussions in December and beyond. I will begin the panel shortly, and this will be followed by a Q&A session in which we really welcome all your input, your questions and your comments. But before that, I'm delighted to give the floor to Ambassador Flavio Damico, the permanent representative of Brazil to the CD and the chair of the BWC Working Group. Ambassador, the screen is yours, sir.
Hello, and I start with my greetings for you that join us in different time zones. It's a pleasure to have you with us today. And of course, I will start by also acknowledging the efforts of the UNIDIR to put this series of events together. And of course, this one on compliance and verification is one of the that draws enormous attention because everybody knows the long history behind this issue. And then we were given not enough time and not enough wherewithal to deal with this very complex issue that throughout the decade has been subject to intense scrutiny and discussion amongst members, and is be seen as the touchstone of these efforts to strengthen the convention. And we would not be able to go anywhere unless we counted with this very dedicated and talented group of friends of the chair, who has been dedicating enormous time and work, and have been carrying out the well-coordinated approaches within the working group, and also for their input in conceiving this webinar. And then I acknowledge first Ambassador Robert Den Bosch, who is assisted by his colleague Bas Blauwels from the Netherlands. I think that Ambassador Den Bosch should be the colleague of ours that has been working the hardest this year, as he's also accumulating the GG on loss, and also the competence, dedication, and talent of Mr. Alonso Martinez from Mexico. And again, I beg your pardon, they're not following me. I wonder if would anybody indicate to me whether this my remarks are being followed or not.
Yes, I can hear you clearly, Ambassador. Please proceed.
Thank you. And also the panelists for today, I recognize their contribution. I think that they will add a lot to our discussions. As I recall, I mean, in terms of context, the collective decision of the 9 Review Conference was to try to find a holistic approach, sorry, to strengthen the BWC. We have to acknowledge that we are we find ourselves at a historical juncture. BWC verification was revised for the first time last December in over 2 decades of interval. We should reflect our shared understanding on the evolving threats in terms of biological warfare. We value the expert panel's presentations, providing essential analytical and comparative perspectives. Their insights at the time have been critical in building up a comprehensive understanding necessary for the complex task of BWC verification. we understand that compliance verification is imperative driven by scientific and technological advancements, and we have to highlight the need for a forward-looking framework adapted to the evolving biosafety and biosecurity landscape. We made progress since the working group's last session in December, but of course we still need to do more in light of the complexities of the discussions ahead. So we have 2024 is a pivotal year that would require substantive progress. In terms of the mandate that was entrusted to us, it is characterized by a balance between thoughtful deliberation and pragmatic action. The focus should be on the negative obligations on Article 1 for any future verification mechanism under the BWC. We should aim for a comprehensive framework for verification and compliance that is simultaneously actionable and grounded in practicality. And we have to ensure that the structures and process to be developed reflect the BWC objectives and goals and will not fall short of them. In terms of organizational, institutional, and financial considerations, we have to have a very open discussion on the implications of our goals, aligning aspirations with resources for a sustainable effort. Moreover, we also recognize that there is a very important interplay between diplomacy and science, and we have to recognize the intertwined roles of diplomacy and science in navigating the verification challenges. And also, we should not forget also bureaucratic considerations as well as to which organ will have primacy in developing those mechanisms. We believe that the BWC is uniquely positioned to do that, but we should not turn a blind eye to the fact that power abhors vacuum, and that some other institutions might be willing to spread their reach, including in areas that should be under the exclusive purview of the BWC. I think that, of course, this being a very complex issue that has been dealt with thoroughly in the past, and we had fallen short of with the objectives at that time, we should envisage a phased methodology and try to design a roadmap. And we welcome this idea of a phased methodology and a roadmap to assemble essential building blocks in a logical and cost-effective sequence. And of course, this has to be built up by consensus by all delegations, and we would like to take advantage of the many contributions that have already been presented. But I believe that delegations should be aware of the fact that this collective construction will try to avail itself of some of the aspects that are being put on the table, but not necessarily all of them. Where do we find ourselves now? I think that we have have taken some initial steps. They were productive, and they of course there were inherent political and technical complexities and differences. But I believe that at this juncture, everybody we have not gotten to a point in which perceptions differ significantly, or we are dealing with entrenched positions. So we still have time to try to build up a common and shared vision for a strengthened BWC. So I'll stop here, and I wish you a good debate. I believe that we will have more than one, but having always in mind the fact that we have to try to deal with an outcome that is simultaneously politically viable, that it's capable of addressing the key concerns of the delegations, but also that should be pragmatic and also feasible in financial terms. So we are still very far away from getting to, let's say, to a finalized product, but I will consider that we have succeeded in our task if by year's end we are in a position to build a roadmap of what awaits for us in the next stages of the negotiation. So these are my initial considerations, Jamie, and thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to address the group. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Damico, for your encouraging words and your continued support from you and your team around these webinars. I think that's some really useful food for thought for our panelists moving forward in this discussion. We are still missing one of the panel, but I do suggest that we proceed. So perhaps I can turn now to our first panelist. So if I could turn to Dr. Una Jakob. Una is the head of the research group for biological and chemical weapons control with the Peace Research Institute Frankfurt, where she is also a senior researcher. I should also add that Una has extensive experience with BWC issues, including through her work on the German delegation to the BWC, and she has closely followed this topic for several years. With that in mind, I'd now like to hand the floor to you, Una. The screen is yours.
Thank you, Jamie. I hope you can all hear me and see me now. Great. Yes, thanks to you and to UNIDIR and also the Friends of the Chair for inviting me to this very distinguished panel, and I'm very happy to be here today with you all. Let me just add before I start that I am speaking here in my personal capacity as PRIF researcher. As Ambassador Damico has just reminded us, we had 3 days of very rich and I would say quite constructive discussions on this important and difficult topic on verification and compliance last year. And I certainly do not intend to drag out issues from the past, as it is important to look ahead and not back. But nevertheless, I would like to start with a very quick and personal look back. As Jamie just mentioned, I've been involved in BWC issues for quite a while, and my first experience actually was in 2002 with the second part of the 5th review conference. So that was just after the last discussions on verification had ended. And I can assure you that the atmosphere back then was very different from what we saw last year, which I think is an encouraging sign that we've moved on and we can still move on further from there. And I just thought it's worth to take a very brief moment to appreciate that and point that out. But of course, putting topics on the agenda is not enough. The BWC community will need to move further forwards. And we will need to get to more shared understandings on this very complex topic. And also ultimately, of course, to practical steps and decisions, hopefully. So there is much work ahead. And when I look back, as I was asked to do, at the contributions of last year, I think it is obvious that there are still very different perspectives regarding the objectives and the scope of a possible verification system. And I certainly don't mean to downplay these differences. They're there and they need to be recognized. But rather than repeating them here, which I don't think would be very useful, I'd like to take my speaking time here to point out some of the ideas or aspects that seem to be widely shared and that could move discussions forward. And in doing so, I am mostly processing and distilling from the working papers that were submitted to the meeting, to the working group meeting last year. So the first thing I'd like to emphasize and mention here may seem trivial, but I don't think it is in this context. And that is that there is obviously a shared view that the BWC needs to be strengthened, that it would be important to enhance confidence and compliance and mutual trust among states parties, But it would also be important and necessary to deal with alleged cases of non-compliance and with allegations wherever they come from and what their basis is. And there even seems to be a shared understanding that verification in some form is valuable. And of course, I have to add in some form, because that is, I guess, where the commonalities end. But still, I think it's important to realize that there is this shared understanding at the very basic level. And I think it would be important to deepen that and to work from there. The second thing I found is that there also seems to be consensus, I might say, on the connection between scientific and technological developments and the topic of verification. So, and this actually applies to various levels, to say. So there is a connection, and this regards potential new threats that might stem from scientific and technological developments in biology and biotechnology. There might be changed threat assessments. There's a different sort of stakeholder landscape. But there are also opportunities arising from S&T developments that could be used to design effective verification systems for this landscape that we have today. So this is, again, something that I think is quite shared and not contested. And this is something to work from. Beyond that, I found quite varying objectives regarding the actual purpose of verification. And that's that wide range goes from enhancing confidence and building trust, to demonstrating compliance, to addressing allegations of non-compliance, dispelling suspicions, even refuting spurious claims, disinformation, to detecting and investigating actual violations, including, I would say, alleged use of biological weapons. So this is a very wide range of things, and of course, it cannot be covered with simple measures or with a small set of measures. But I think it might be useful to sort of divide them in two different layers. So the one thing is what states parties can do on an ongoing basis, in whichever form, and I think many ideas are out there. So to demonstrate their compliance, build confidence, provide transparency about routine processes, which would help show patterns of regular behavior. This is not my own idea. This is an old idea that's been out there for a long time, but I think it's important and useful in this discussion. Show patterns which might make it easier to recognize deviations from their patterns. And then, of course, we need measures to go on from there. And that would be the second thing then, to have measures that help investigate and look deeper into cases, into suspicions and cases where compliance might not be complete confidence in compliance, of course, going to actual violations and investigations. So this would be the part to deter, detect, and react to actual violations. These are very different objectives requiring different approaches and different methods. But I think it might be helpful to see these objectives, approaches, and measures not as mutually exclusive and competing. I mean, some of them might be, especially when we look at political realities, but not all of them have to be, I think. So it might be helpful to consider them as complementary and mutually reinforcing sides of the same coin, and that coin, of course, being strengthening of the PwC. And I think several of the working papers that were submitted last year contain measures going in that direction towards that end. So how can we move forward? And I'll be very brief and selective in what I have to say here, because we have more contributions and we want to have time for the discussion afterwards. So I think the first thing is very basic, and I suppose that work is already ongoing on that, is to work out a set of principles, or maybe not make it that strong, a set of guiding ideas that is widely shared, and record that, put that on paper, and maybe have that as a living document where when more shared understandings emerge, this could be added and kind of be the basis from which the more practical work could then develop. And the second, again, not a new idea, but maybe something that should be tackled concretely and not just suggested abstract in an abstract way, is carry out an S&T-based assessment. And we all know that it's needed, and we all know that many people have suggested that. So just start a process on looking at S&T developments and how they could be useful and where they could be pose risks, and find a place to do that. I mean, a new S&T mechanism would be the logical place, I guess, but we don't have that yet, and it might take, and I hope we'll get there, but it might take a little while. So maybe consider about an interim forum or an informal process to get that started, and not just say we need it, but actually get to work and do that. And last but not least, it sounds simple, but I know it isn't. Keep up a constructive and pragmatic approach, because I think that's where the work can actually be done. And if that is possible, then I guess it might not be too overly optimistic to expect at least some progress at this year's meetings in this direction or another. So that would be my take on last year's meetings and the possible way forward. Thanks very much for your attention, and I look forward to the other contributions and the discussion later on. Thank you.
Many thanks, Una. I'd echo your points on the changing threat and opportunities landscape and also the complementary nature of many of those proposed measures, so thank you. We'll encourage questions. If people would like to submit questions to Una or to any of our panelists, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. I will get to as many questions as we can do, but I'll do that after we've heard from our 3 and hopefully 4 panelists, as we're still missing 1 person. But I'd now like to turn to Dr. Ajey Lele. Ajey is the Deputy Director General of the Manohar and Parrikar Institute for Defence Studies and Analysis, and also no stranger to issues related to the BWC. It's an area where he's published and presented widely, including through editorial work on the Journal of Chemical Biological Weapons. So if I could put the same question to you, Ajey, could you provide an overview of the discussion in December and your sense of where do we go from here? The screen is yours, sir.
Thank you so much. I hope you are able to hear me.
We can hear you and see you clearly. Thank you.
Thank you. First of all, let me thank you in person as well as UNIDIR for giving me this opportunity. I think now the time has come that we need to move ahead. And from that perspective, this discussion will be quite useful. So let me start with the basics. Since we are the friends of the chair, I think we got a very larger responsibility on all of us in various areas, whether we will give some constructive suggestions or we will agree to disagree also on various issues. So I think as a friends of chair, we got a very larger responsibility. Having said that, we all know, and particularly this audience definitely knows, that verification protocol is actually the elephant in the room. And over a period of time, say last 5 decades or so, we are trying to address that issue. The elephant has grown bigger, but the size of the room and the size of a door still remains the same. So there is a problem. Let me slightly go back to the history. In 1991 third review conference, we had an idea put forward. Subsequently, it took shape by 1993-94, if I'm correct, ad hoc working group. Vertex is also a part, Verex is also part of that idea only. So that actually end up seeing a rolling text also, few issues which were raised. There was a very healthy debate if you go back to the historical debate at that point in time. And I think that debate is even relevant in today's date in time. But what I found is that there were 3 major objections which were raised during 1994-95 period. The objections were there, like the protocol was inadequate to detect secret bioweapons proliferation. It would be unacceptably jeopardize the commercial proprietary secrets, and it would endanger the biodefense programs. I think there is a need to have a fresh look after so many years now have passed, to have a look at these types of objections which were taken then. And I think those objections continued for quite some time. So I think for any agency, it will be very difficult to say with certitude that we will 100% be in a position to identify a secret bioweapon proliferation program of any country. Because you all know that even a test tube can be a bioweapon, and it's virtually impossible to say that we can identify that sort of a thing. So the protocol's inadequacy to identify the secret bioweapon proliferation program, I think in today's date in time, one should not take it to the such a drastic argument that yes, we need a protocol which can detect anything and everything. I think that's not done, and one should understand that. I have got to say on commercial proprietary secrets, because yes, there are issues related to IPR and there are various other issues. But I think the COVID-19 crisis have actually informed all of us in the world that your medical fraternity, your pharma industry, your vaccines industry, all those things have got something which is useful for the humanity. And until and unless we don't have these types of either or, neither nor sort of a situations where we will say that our commercial interests are supreme, I think that's not the condition which one should think of, particularly in the post-COVID era. Because we understand that pharma and vaccine industry is not only about profits, and we need to find a way around the issues to guard the commercial secrets also. I'm not saying that you got to give up your secrets, because at the end of the day, industry is there to earn profits, and we can't allow them to not to do so. But at the same time, you should not have a maximalist position that yes, industry interests are supreme and we will just not do any sort of a collaboration in that area. Then the issue of a bio defense program. I think bio defense program is not only about biological weapons. Particularly, I'm again going back to the COVID-19 crisis and try to understand that is bio defense all about addressing the challenges out of bioweapons, or there is something more to it. I think now the time has come for the entire world, particularly the like-minded countries, to understand that the so-called top level secrecy in bio-defense program is of no use. You need to collaborate with each other. You need to have some sort of a joint projects working on. There has to be certain amount of information sharing. And under those circumstances, I think the argument which was made during 1993-94 period that we will not be able to do our biodefense programs in a particular fashion the way a state envisages it. So I think the three arguments which were done after ad hoc working group that yes, it is just not a workable solution. Those arguments, particularly in the 21st century, we have seen the first 2 decades of the 21st century no longer hold good. Then let me straightway jump to the December 23 meeting, where some interesting issues have emerged. We all understand that the common DNA in regards to issues of compliance and verification. So it is important to verify. The right questions were asked during this meeting in the month of December, that what to verify and who should be tasked for that purpose. We generally know that what to verify. But I think particularly during this point in time when there is so much amount of progress which has been made in the areas of biotechnology, pharma industry, vaccine industry, as such in the entire domain of biological weapons, that there could be a challenge to identify what to verify. This is because now biology and biotechnology has emerged more as a multidisciplinary subject. And right from say 3D printing to artificial intelligence to anything and everything of a modern technology has got a direct or indirect connect with the area of a biology. So there could be a problem of what to verify. So from an industry, verification is going to be a mammoth task under these circumstances. From inspection point of view, there is a need to develop a special criteria in regards to the agencies which should be put under the inspection regime. I know it's very easy to propose this, but actually very difficult to get into the nitty-gritties when you start discussing it. But I thought that at least let me make this point out over here. There could be issues related to threshold quantities determination also. There was a discussion on threshold quantities determination also. I think at end of the day, when you are talking of a biological weapon, you're just going to do some sort of a disease spread. And there is nothing called a threshold quantity over here. Even one virus or one germ also could be a challenge. So this again area needs to be understood in a right perspective. Under such circumstances, the idea of inspections, as it is normally envisaged, may not be a good idea. Actually, to my mind, it could be a it could be a non-starter only. And a scientific community needs to come out with some out-of-box thinking of what to verify under those circumstances, particularly when biotechnology is not a classic biology in today's point in time. Yes, we can learn from a template of OPCW about the inspection regimes and how to go ahead about it. Because OPCW has got a long experience, they have learned in a hard way, one can say. But again, there are challenges. You all understand that about challenge inspections, so on and so forth. So any sort of a inspections regime itself has got certain amount of limitations which are inbuilt. And few people may think that that could be a non-starter. Again, to my mind, there could be much learning from existing laboratory biosafety and biosecurity protocols too. It needs to be understood that industry and scientific practices in the field of biology could vary in some cases. Particularly, there could be certain amount of a regional imbalances is not a correct word, regional differences in about how you address the issues related to biosafety and biosecurity also. Again, there could be a industry-based certain amount of solutions or certain amount of norms or a rule position, which could differ from an industry to industry in the domain of a biotechnology itself. So we need to have a very proper understanding of these things. Then there is an issue of a disease surveillance. I think this issue needs to be addressed, particularly at the backdrop of COVID-19 crisis, and maybe BWC could have certain amount of a connect with the WMO to understand all those things. I think when we are talking of a verification and other mechanisms to be put in place, one understands that there could be a heinous method done by a covert actor or a non-state actor of using bioweapons. But at the same time, there are so many things happening in the nature itself. So when you're talking of a disease surveillance, I think as a BWC, we need to make certain amount of investments into biosituational awareness too. Lastly, what I'll say is that the debate and the discussion, when only happening into the four walls, without putting a scientific community on the table, could be problematic. So instead of coming out with rules, regulations, and norms, without having a pilot project towards it may not be correct. And I will strongly suggest that we need to have a pilot project in place for the purposes about how to evolve the best practices for inspections, since only discussions may not lead to any sort of a effective documentation. In this context, what I will suggest is that maybe ISU could organize a tabletop exercise or some sort of a simulation exercise where you will have multidisciplinary experts available who will try to understand about the processes further. Of course, a lot of amount of groundwork will be required to be done in these contexts. But I think if you want to make some sort of a progress, some sort of a technical guidelines to be put in place, we need to do certain amount of a tabletop exercise or a simulation or what we call net assessment. There are various terminologies which could be used for that. So I think this is what I could suggest at this point in time, and let's see what comes out during the discussion. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Ajey. I think that the question of what to verify is really important to consider further. And I also note with interest your points for pilot projects and for simulation exercises as well. So thank you. I'd encourage our participants, if you do have questions, please do submit these using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. We will get to those, but before that, I'm delighted to welcome to the screen, to the floor, Ms. Amanda Moodie. Amanda is a policy fellow at the National Defence University Centre for the Study of Weapons of Mass Destruction. And Amanda has also served as a member of the US delegations to meetings of the states parties, BWC, for several years, in fact. She is speaking in a personal capacity today, and the screen is yours, Amanda.
Okay, thank you, Jamie. I want to say thank you, first of all, to UNIDIR and to the Friends of the Chair, both for inviting me and also for organizing this series, which I think is a great opportunity to have these discussions. I do want to reiterate, this is my personal capacity. My views are not necessarily going to reflect the opinion either of the National Defense University or the US government. So if you're hoping I'm going to be able to give insight into US positions, sorry to disappoint. So I do think it's really good that we're having this discussion. And I think Una's reflections on how far we've come over the last 20 years and how different the mood is in the room are really helpful to note. It's important that we're talking about verification, and not just because it's such an important preoccupation for so many states parties, but for a couple of other reasons as well. One, when you get states to submit declarations or submit other types of confidence building measures about their biological activities or otherwise demonstrate their compliance, that can actually help to indicate that they're committed to the treaty, that they're committed to upholding the norm against biological weapons. And that makes sure that we're all sort of on the same page about what the objective is here. And two, from more of a sort of global health perspective, doing that process and getting that information about what is going on within a state can also provide information that helps us better understand how different countries are thinking about and approaching biodefense and biosecurity and all these types of issues. So it goes beyond just making sure that nobody is deliberately developing biological weapons, and it has these much broader benefits as well. So I think it's really good that we are finally at the point where we can have this conversation. But again, we clearly have a very long way to go. And I do want to reiterate what Una said, that there are clearly varying objectives out there about the purpose of verification. And there are different perspectives on what these different terms like verification and compliance mean. And some of those perspectives are in direct conflict with each other. And I think this is borne out not just by the working group discussions and the working papers that came out of December, but also the research study from Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security that looked to explore how different stakeholders are thinking about these terms. And what that study found is that there really isn't consensus around this. Are we talking about concrete evidence that no nefarious activities are taking place? Are we talking about identifying anomalies in declarations? Are we talking about investigating suspected uses of biological weapons? All of these approaches require different measures with different levels of intrusiveness. And I think that there are also a lot of different perspectives out there on the biological threat in general. What are we actually worried about? Are we concerned about large-scale offensive programs? Are we concerned about lone wolves and other non-state actors, or state-sponsored terrorism? Again, these different ways of viewing the threat are going to drive different approaches for how you try to deal with it. So for example, if you mostly see the biological weapons threat as emanating from non-state actors, then a measure for verification that's focused on government-to-government international exchange visits, or trying to characterize the nature of government institutions with remote sensing, are not really going to help you solve the problem. They're not going to increase your confidence that there's no nefarious biological weapons activity underway. So I appreciate the effort that a number of states parties have made thus far in their working papers and in the discussions in December to sort of try to spell out their views on these issues. And I think it's helpful for that process to continue, because we're at the point where states parties really need to start to be explicit about their opinions and their positions on some of these issues, and to try to spell out how they're thinking about the biological weapons threat and what kind of confidence level they would actually find acceptable, so we can try to identify where there's common ground and where we disagree. So I agree that an assessment kind of based in science and technology, one, seems to be something that a lot of states agree would be helpful. And two, that process would be helpful in thinking about biological threats, biological threat assessments, as well as opportunities for how do we sort of approach the verification question. And I know that UNIDIR has already put out a really helpful paper on new technologies that could be helpful for the process. For example, as we're sort of thinking about going through large quantities of data and narrowing down to what's important, artificial intelligence and large language models could be really beneficial in thinking about things like surveillance of legislation or surveillance of publications. But I think there are a number of other elements that go beyond just science and technology and how some of these new technologies might assist us, that we also need to do some more careful thinking about, and there needs to be some room in the process for that. For example, how do we think about cooperation with the private sector, not just in terms of working with the biotechnology and pharmaceutical industries, but also companies that might sort of assist with some of that technology. Companies, for example, that might provide commercial satellite imagery or social media data that could be helpful for societal verification. We tend to think of that data a lot of the time as open source, but the fact is that it's owned by the private sector, and that those companies can deny requests to use that data. So it's useful to kind of think about, how do we start to cooperate with those companies if that's information that we would find helpful and start building in that process of engagement early on. How do we think about legal constraints? This is no longer, an issue where proprietary information belongs to companies or national governments. Some of this data now belongs to individuals, and there's been a huge increase in legislation designed to protect the health privacy of individuals. I would note that, back in the 1990s, when we first started having this conversation about verification and what does that look like, that was before legislation was passed in the United States protecting the health privacy information of individuals. So we're now potentially in a rather different legal situation than we were previously. So a process that kind of starts to take into account some of those changes and some of those other legal regimes that are going to come to bear here could be really helpful. And then sort of a final element for consideration is, what experience do we have in parallel regimes? So again, back in the 1990s, I think we were mostly drawing on our decades of experience in the nuclear realm. But I think even then, everyone sort of understood the limitations of that approach because nuclear is so different. You've got such a different approach with material accountancy that really just doesn't apply in the biological realm. The Chemical Weapons Convention was maybe a little bit more applicable, but it was relatively new. We didn't have a large data set to draw on of how inspections might be helpful, or how that sort of routine process that we had developed might contribute to the verification process. We now have 2 more decades of experience that we can look on, that we can draw lessons from. So I think maybe taking a step back and considering how some of those parallel regimes might influence our work and what lessons we can potentially learn from them would be a really critical step in thinking about the universe of possible verification measures and where we sort of go from here and what our options are. I just want to sort of remind folks, we're not going to be able to do everything all at once. I agree that a realistic goal is trying to sort of set up a roadmap by the end of the year. But I think, at this point, it's really helpful for states to do some critical thinking about how they see the biological risk picture, how that might look different than it did 20 or 30 years ago, what level of confidence they're really looking for, and what level of intrusiveness they're willing to accept. Which of the measures that were on the table back in the 1990s might be helpful, what new measures might be out there that they can consider. And if every state party can kind of bring that sort of analysis to the table, then we can start to identify where to focus the next set of discussions and what those discussions might look like. So I just wanted to put a few thoughts out there for consideration. I'm looking forward to the questions and discussion. Thanks.
Many thanks, Amanda. I think that the point on what are we worried about and the range of threats, the risk picture, I think is really useful to raise, because we do have a range of possible agents, delivery systems, which could be combined to achieve a range of different objectives. I think that is something to keep in mind. We were hoping to be able to hear from Dr. Leifan Wang, who's an Associate Professor of International Law at Tianjin University School of Law and Center for Biosafety Research. But for reasons I'm not quite clear, I don't think we've managed to have the connection to Leifan, unless my colleagues in production advise me otherwise. Maria, please. Okay. All right. Thanks, Maria. In that case, I suggest that we proceed to the Q&A section of this. I'm glad to see we have a question in the chat or in the Q&A section already. I would encourage others, please do submit your questions. But in the meantime, perhaps I can put a question. This is directed towards you, Ajey. And the question is, do you think that inspections are a non-starter for verification? Is this due to political or logistical barriers? I think perhaps for other panelists as well after you, Ajey, perhaps we could ask this wider question around routine industry inspections, because I noticed there's some differences of opinion here, but perhaps we can start with you first, Ajey. The screen is yours, sir.
Thank you so much. I think there is a point that inspections are going to be a problematic issue from various reasons, like you rightly put it out, from logistical purposes, from technology purposes also, because what to verify itself is a very challenging thing. And like I was making a mention that biotechnology or a science of biology have now become a multidisciplinary science. We all know that what sort of a changes which has happened into a DNA technology also. So a lot of things which are there, particularly artificial intelligence, may allow a non-state actor or a person of a rogue element to derive something out of the existing system, a brand new, a different type of a biological approach. So what to verify itself is going to be a challenge. And I think that's the basic challenge which we need to face out over here. From OPCW, yes, we can have a basic understanding of how to conduct the inspections. But the nature of the inspections which are happening in a chemical industry and the nature of inspections which may happen or which we propose to do into a biotechnology or a biological industry are going to be totally different. Because we just, at this point in time, in the chemical industry, there is a clarity that what they want to inspect. As far as biotechnology industry is there, we just don't have a clarity, at least at this point in time, what is to be done. And more importantly, I think the issue which comes to the foray out over here, it's not correct to bring this issue, but I think the issue of money also will come. Who are going to pay for all those things? And I think that is the basic limitation of taking any sort of agenda under BWC, that there is a dearth of a financial support which is there. And I think we need to put it in a context that if you want to do any sort of activities in getting into the domain of inspections, we need to have both technical as well as a financial support. So I think that's going to be the challenging thing. And one should always address the issue of a financial support because ISO itself is not able to do all those things which we may think that they should be able to do because they have got tremendous amount of limitations from a financial point of view.
Great. Many thanks, Ajey. I think that issue of how we're going to pay for these things is really important. And it's something which I think the friends of the chair have raised in their points as well, the importance of financial viability and sustainability. So I suspect we may come back to it. Perhaps I could turn to you, Una, the question of inspections, visits as they were known in the protocol. Please, the screen is yours.
Yes, thank you. I mean, Ajey has raised a number of challenges and practical aspects already. So the question was what the obstacle, so to say, would be, or the position as a political or logistic. I think the very clear answer would be both, and it depends, because it depends what kind of inspections we're talking about, and that relates to something I think Amanda just mentioned in her presentation, which is very important and useful to keep in mind, is which level of intrusiveness are we talking about? How do we protect legitimate security and intellectual property concerns and things like that? And also, of course, how is the perception of the utility of inspections? But inspections could be, like you just mentioned, they were called visits in the protocol. There could be different terms for that. But I think that the question is, are we talking about some routine activity, like routine on-site activity, monitoring regular processes, or are we talking about some sort of on-site activity to investigate, to look at suspicions, to look at suspicious activities? And that, I think, is a crucial difference, because there will be very different views on having the routine activity, inspection, whatever we want to call it, versus the sort of reaction to suspicions, allegations, or some sort of events. And that would also have an impact on how acceptable such measures would be. I would say, as I said earlier, some sort of routine monitoring of whatever kind, I think, might be helpful. It doesn't have to be on site, maybe, but I don't know, because that is something for the scientists, I think, to discuss. And we definitely need some instruments to look into allegations and suspicions. If we call that inspections, I mean, I know the political sensitivities, but sometimes I think it's just okay to call a spade a spade. So if it's someone looking at things, it might well be just an inspection. But that is part, I think, of the whole process, that we need to talk about what to verify, what the objectives are, what the motivation is. And I think this has to be sorted out first, and then we can see what the appropriate role for inspections would be beyond ideology and political ideas, but just a very practical function. is it useful or is it not useful for the purpose that we've defined earlier? So I think that's probably the sequence to go to have a pragmatic and productive discussion about that.
Many thanks, Una. I would encourage you also to please do call a spade a spade. And I also think you're right, there will be logistical, financial, political and procedural challenges for both routine and non-routine inspections or visits, to use protocol parlance, but they're likely to be quite different in terms of some of the expectations between non-routine and routine visits, inspections, I should say. Perhaps I could turn to you, Amanda, to take the same question. The screen is yours.
Sure, thanks. So I agree, first of all, that I think there is a difference when we're talking about routine inspections versus what we might call challenge inspections, for want of a better term. Because I agree, you know, we are going to need some sort of mechanism involved to look into allegations and to think about what happens if you identify something that doesn't fit the baseline. And to sort of go back to the original question, is it a political or a technical challenge? I think when it comes to the challenge inspection questions, there's a political issue, and we've seen that on the CWC side, that it's difficult to kind of overcome the barriers of requesting an investigation like that. It's a high bar to clear, but that doesn't mean it's not a useful mechanism to have in place. On sort of the routine inspection side, you know, I would just again say that this is an area where there might actually be some useful lessons from other regimes. And I agree, you know, the OPCW context is very different. What we're looking for in the chemical space is very different from what we're looking for in the biospace. But you know, we now have 20 years of experience with routine inspections under the OPCW, and it's a little bit outside my lane. There are others, I think, who have a lot more experience with the chemical side, but to the best of my knowledge, to the best of my understanding, those routine inspections that we've done under the CWC haven't really identified any compliance concerns. I mean, that's not something that has sort of flagged major issues with compliance with the convention. So if that's the objective, just based on kind of that data set that we have out of the CWC, it doesn't seem like that's necessarily a super useful mechanism or approach. Now, if the objective is more to sort of get information about the ways that states approach these issues and the way that their chemical industry handles things, for example, then sure, I can see that there might be utility added. But again, it sort of depends on what your objective is. Are you just trying to get a baseline of information, or are you actually trying to identify potential issues with compliance? Because based on the data set that we have to date, it really doesn't seem like it's all that useful from that latter purpose. And so I guess my sort of knee-jerk reaction would be, that seems like a lot of effort and a lot of expense that doesn't actually really get you very far in addressing the concerns. But again, it's a little bit outside my lane, so others who know better may have a different take on it.
Many thanks, Amanda. I think it's a really interesting point. I mean, I wonder whether there's a role that they play in the chemical side in terms of incentivizing the completion of declarations and perhaps understanding the implementation of the treaty, even if it's not necessarily identifying compliance concerns per se. But thank you. I've got a couple of questions coming in now, and perhaps I can turn back to you, Una. There's a question here on panelists' thoughts on separating various terms under the umbrella of verification, routine monitoring, compliance assessment, investigations. And the question is, do the relationships between terms like verification and compliance or non-compliance and violation factor into the way we think about this process? I wonder whether you want to take that question on the semantics, and then I'll put this to the other panelists as well. But please, Una, the screen is yours.
Yes, thanks, Jamie, and also thanks for the question. I'm very happy to talk about that because I think these are very important conceptual issues. So first of all, on the separation, I was trying to point that out in my remarks earlier, that I think it is useful to separate well, not separate, but consider these issues in different, I call it layers, that there would be baskets or whatever, that we have different approaches to routine activities showing regular behavior and demonstrating compliance, and then looking into suspicions and allegations of non-compliance and violation. And so I think that's useful. And that brings me to the second part of the question. And as you said, Jamie, the semantics. And I think this is very important. And it's not just about words or favorite expressions, but there is a very significant difference. Well, first of all, verification and compliance, of course, are like part of the same problem or issue, but verifying compliance is something different than stating or confirming non-compliance. The one can be a technical process and the other would be a political or legal assessment after something had been verified. So I think it's important to keep that in mind, that there is it's not just a semantic, well, it's a difference, but it's also a difference in the activity and the technical versus legal and political context. And also non-compliance and violation. And I actually owe that to a very good colleague of mine, Thilo Maraun, who educated me and others on that recently, that it's important to distinguish between cases where states parties might not fulfill all the obligations, for example, on national implementation, but that's not like the same as violating Article 1. So it would be important to factor that in and find a way to deal with that. That some things might just be a lack of awareness or a lack of resources of some obligations, and that's on a different level and needs to be or should be dealt with differently than intentional violation of a prohibition or an obligation. Of course, this makes it a little more complex. Not that we need that, but still, I think it's important. So I'm grateful for the question and for the opportunity to point that out, because I think that's actually an important thing, and it points to the need for having both a cooperative approach to solving these problems and also to dealing with actual violations. Thank you.
Thank you. Perhaps Ajey, I could put the same question to you, the semantics, but also there's a separate question you may be able to help with here, which looks at to what extent can the experience of the CTBTO be applied? So, for example, having a team within the ISU or coordinated by the ISU working continuously on the inspection methodology, testing, adapting the various elements until there is agreement. So there's a question there, and then also please feel free to take the one on semantics as well. The screen's yours, Ajey.
Thank you. I think I entirely agree with Una when she is talking that we need to have a very clear-cut differentiation between what is verification, what is compliance, what is violation, and all that. Because at the end of the day, when state parties will sit together to discuss the issues, there could be a lot of issues related with legalities also. So we need to have that as a clarity, because unless we don't have a clarity on the exact definitions on these aspects, we just can't move further. And as far as the suggestion that can there be a committee sort of a thing under ISU or a ISU monitored committee, I think that's a very good idea. But here I would like to make 2 points. So one is that let's not inspect just for the sake of inspections. We need to have first clarity that what to inspect, because routine inspections otherwise will not lead us to anything. They will be just routine inspections. Some reports will be filed. What is important is that we need to first understand what to inspect and how to inspect about it. I think a committee or a group of people working under those things under ISU will be a very interesting thing. Other aspect is that for in many years now, ISU is getting declarations by various state parties also. I think if you do the analysis of those declarations also, that itself will give you an idea that what sort of biotechnology industries, what sort of other issues which are related to BWC are actually existing. So it's not that we have to start from the scratch. There could be a good amount of data available with ISU, and a committee or a team of members, particularly as I already mentioned, it should be a multidisciplinary committee. It's not only policymakers. You need to have hardcore scientific community which is associated with it. And I think it will be a very welcome idea that first we need to do certain amount of analysis that how we should make the progress further.
Many thanks, Ajey. I think that's a useful point. I'll turn now, put the question to you, Amanda. There's one around semantics, but also feel free to elaborate on the point around the CTBTO as well in the earlier question. And the screen is yours, Amanda.
So I think the question about semantics is a really interesting one. And again, I think, you know, clearly part of the issue that we're dealing with here is definitional. So if we can sort of disaggregate that term verification into some different concepts, that could actually be really helpful. But I think, you know, a lot of what we are interested in the verification context, you need a baseline, because whether you're interested in sort of maintaining just routine monitoring of that baseline or identifying some of those anomalies, you sort of need that as a starting point. So there are certain elements of that I think are probably non-negotiable. They sort of have to be a part of the concept. But I still think it's useful to sort of try to break that apart, and be very clear about some of the different terms that we're talking about. And then the question about sort of the CTBTO experience and the applicability here, I certainly think it could be useful in the current context. Again, you know, a lot of this comes down to resources, and obviously the current ISU doesn't have the capability to do some of this given the resource constraints, but I think it's, you know, reasonable to look at whether that's something that could be set up in the future. But as far as sort of testing some of the different elements until there's agreement, I'm a little bit leery of that approach, just because I think there is a certain amount of path dependency. Like once you try one particular approach, it's difficult to acknowledge if that's not working and move on and do something else. Because there's a certain amount of sunk cost involved, right? We've now spent X amount of money and Y number of years trying this. Being able to say, you know what, that's not actually getting us any closer toward confidence and compliance can be a difficult line to draw. That's not to say that I think the approach is entirely unuseful. I think there would need to be some guardrails built in to be able to say, okay, if we're going to try this approach of testing out different elements, there needs to be a very clear way of moving on if and when we decide that they're not actually working.
Okay, thank you, Amanda. I certainly take the point on the baselines, and I think you're right. The caution around getting locked into a particular approach is one where we need to be a little bit careful. We have a couple more questions. I wanted to turn to you now. You know, this sort of extends the discussion about inspections, but also related issues. But there's a question here about whether there could be a sort of collaborative approach to things like biodefense projects or outside national territory as well, and whether there could be scope for trying to use CBMs or peer review type initiatives to support this. Just before you do answer that question, I should caveat this by pointing out CBMs, peer reviews are not a substitute for verification. But with that, Una, the screen is yours.
Yes, thank you. That's a very complex issue. I think transparency in biodefense is a difficult issue, of course, because it goes to the heart of security concerns, and we heard about the concerns to protect sensitive information. But it's also, I think, important. I mean, transparency in biodefense goes to the heart of the issue, and the BWC is a disarmament treaty. So this is, I guess, part of what we have to talk about. But I think it needs to be addressed in context and in combination with whatever we come up with as an overall approach to routine activities. And I'm not saying routine inspections, but whatever methods and measures states parties agree on to demonstrate compliance and reveal patterns of regular behavior, as I said earlier. So I think in that context, biodefense is something that needs to be talked about as well. And before we know if that approach is via CBMs, and I understand we have another question about that, or peer review, or any new measures we might come up with, I think that has to be discussed in that context. So again, as I said before, I think we need to clarify concepts first, and then we can discuss concrete measures that correspond to the concepts that states parties want to apply, and the objectives that verification is going to serve. And once we have that sorted out, then we can see which approach would fit those purposes and those objectives best. And that's, I think, the phase to talk about these concrete steps and measures then. Thanks.
Okay, many thanks, Una. Perhaps I could put the same question to you, Ajey, in relation to collaborative approaches to biodefense projects and then the potential for other tools such as CBMs or peer review. Welcome your thoughts on that before I turn to Amanda. The screen's yours, sir.
I think this is an interesting proposal. I really don't know whether it is a doable proposal of having international efforts towards biodefense. But I think there is logic in doing these things. Some off-the-cuff remark which I would like to make it over here is that we had a year of a chemistry by CWC. We are talking of lack of resources, various other aspects of it, international collaborations and all that. So if you can have something on the lines of a year of a biology, where you can allow the global technological institutes, the scientific institutes to work on certain aspects of a biodefense and a joint collaborative efforts, because the moment you start saying it under BWC and Biological Weapons Convention, there could be certain amount of uneasiness amongst the scientific organizations also. So if you can have something at the background going as a year of a biology, give certain scientific organizations all over the world some specific problems which we want them to actually resolve or at least try to work on them. That maybe could be an interesting area which could be tried. I'm not sure whether it will succeed or not, but just a off-the-cuff idea. As far as other aspects of peer review processes and all that, I think these are the things which needs to be tried out, because you just can't give up on the peer review process. Because at the end of the day, international science only has evolved jointly all over the world only because of a peer review process. And these processes need to be taken to its logical conclusion. Long and short, biodefense as a collaborative measure, I think there is no harm in at least trying it out with the agencies who have got total amount of a collaboration. Just to give an example, maybe European Union, where there is good amount of a commonalities of interest as far as science and technology is concerned, could be an idea where certain EU agencies join hands together and try to work on joint policies on biodefense. It's worth a try, I can say so.
Many thanks, Ajey. Amanda, perhaps I could put the same question to you, but if I could combine it with another question which we've received, which is actually directed or mentioned to you. So there's two parts to this. To what extent do you think it helpful to revisit technical recommendations from past verification discussions in the current working group? And then the second part of this, and further to Amanda's point, what are the merits or drawbacks of continuing to rely on CBMs to maintain trust in compliance in lieu of routine inspections? Amanda, if you want to take any or all of those, the screen's yours.
Sure. So first, the drawback of speaking third is that I feel like a bit of a broken record that I keep repeating. I agree with Una and Ajey, but in this case, I do agree. I think one of the things that we have learned post-COVID is biological issues are not limited to one specific country. And so these are problems that are also going to require international cooperation to solve. And so I think the cross-border biodefense cooperation that we are seeing is likely only going to continue. There seems to be a lot of interest from a lot of countries in continuing to sort of do international cooperation on biodefense efforts. And a recognition that these aren't issues that any one country can solve on their own. So I think we're going to see that continue. I think questions about sort of where does verification fit into that, and how do you approach this when you're dealing with collaborative efforts that do cross borders, are really valid questions. But I think that Una's right, that there needs to be a little bit more discussion of sort of exactly what is the problem, what is it that we're trying to deal with, before we can sort of dig in on specific methods to solve that. I think certainly, you know, peer review could potentially have a role to play, and I agree that it's interesting to sort of test that out and see where that goes and see if that's something that can contribute to the problem. But you know, I think that that's probably something where again, we need to maybe take a step back and do some analysis on what's effective and what isn't, and do a little bit more careful thinking before we can say, okay, here are some specific measures that we want to adopt. And then the question about sort of revisiting technical recommendations from past verification discussions, my personal take is, you know, those discussions were useful. We don't necessarily have to reinvent the wheel. It is helpful to go back and think about the outcomes from the VEREX process, for example. But it's also important to recognize that we're in a very different place now, technically, geopolitically. Some of those measures are likely to continue to be helpful. Some of them are not. And so I think that it is helpful to revisit those and think about those as sort of helping to define the universe of options that are available to us, but also not to get sort of locked into that as the end all be all approach. I think that there's a lot of room for expansion. Some of those are not necessarily going to be super applicable anymore. So as long as we are careful about not allowing that to be overly prescriptive or overly define our discussions, I do think it's helpful to revisit. And then finally, the question about relying on CBMs. I understand the limitations of CBMs, and I don't necessarily think that has to be the format forever, but I do think at a certain point, you do have to rely on the reporting that's coming from states in order to sort of get that baseline of information. Because the universe of potential facilities, potential activities that we might be interested in is so large that you do need a state to provide some information and say, okay, here's what we're doing, and here are some of the places that you might be interested in order to sort of bound that discussion. So I understand the limitations, but I do think that CBMs or some sort of declaration or something similar will continue to be a useful tool. And it's just helpful in thinking about how do we make those as useful as possible? What information do we actually want states to provide? And what do we do with that information once we have it? So that's sort of the key piece of the discussion. But I think there has to be some sort of self-reporting involved.
Many thanks, Amanda. Just for participants to note, there was a webinar on CBMs which took place last week, and perhaps my colleagues could put a link to the recording of that discussion. I'm conscious of the time, and I think we have a couple more questions to address, but what I propose to do is to turn to all our panelists, and if they want to take a question which I'll read out shortly, as well as providing any sort of closing remarks or points, that would be very helpful. Perhaps I can turn to you first, Una. And the question I have, I mean, it seems no bio-related event is complete nowadays without a couple of questions related to AI. So the question we have here is, we've heard and learned on various occasions that AI can impact upon the biosecurity landscape. I believe the AI coin has two sides. So flipping the coin, how, if at all, can AI be leveraged to enhance verification methods for compliance with the BWC? And perhaps if you want to take that question, Una, and then any other further comments you might like to make, the screen is yours.
Thank you. Yeah, I totally agree that it's impossible to escape the topic, and I don't think we should and want to escape it. But I am not the person to give you a very well-founded technical answer to that. But I think what's clear is that AI is here to stay, and there are rapid developments, so we need to do that. And if that's the case, then I think it's very important and prudent to look at how we can use it, and not just look at the risks, of course, but also how we can use it. And I think one important function might be the ability to collect more information in shorter time and get access to more information and save resources in doing so, which could feed into what I mentioned several times now. The creation or recognition of patterns of behavior of things. So I think that could be important, but I think what's important, at least as I understand the technology right now at this point in time, is that it's still important also to have some human resources involved in that process. So, I mean, AI is great for collecting information, but that's not the end of it. So there need to be assessments and the probing of plausibilities and things like that. So I think we don't want to leave that to AI, at least not at this point. And as far as I'm concerned, never, but I stand to be convinced, but not at this point, definitely. So, yeah, I don't know, Jamie, if I got that right, but you asked us also to provide some final comments at this point right now. So that would be my time to do that, right? Okay.
Please go ahead. Yes, that's great.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to do that. Just wanted to make sure. Actually, I might take the final question that I see in the Q&A session to include in that the most important problem in verification of the BWC. And I think one of the most important and biggest problems is that there is no one bullet point answer to that question. So there is no one most important problem, but it's a very complex setting, a very complex set of issues that need to be considered and addressed, which makes it all the more important to put much effort in the discussions and the preparations and the process. So I think my final point would be that it's really important to seize this opportunity that is there at this point. We have the working group and the political momentum to discuss these issues. So it would be really important to seize that in a pragmatic way. And I'm not asking for overcoming political differences, and that's not possible and it's not necessary, but just work on the issue. And also, I think my final point in that would be make use of all the available expertise that's there inside governments and outside governments, and make sure to bring in those perspectives and the knowledge and experiences. Because it's so complex, it requires, I think, insights and information and ideas from various fields, academic, professional, governmental. So I think it would be important to make this process as inclusive as possible. Thank you. And thanks for having this discussion.
Thank you. And I certainly echo your point on keeping the humans in the loop when it comes to verification, and also the point you raised around making the most of the window of opportunity that we have to move this forward and bringing in stakeholders to do so. Ajey, if I could turn to you, it's the same question on AI, but anything else you'd like to raise in closing? The screen is yours, sir.
Thank you. I think AI is becoming a very important issue in global discussions in any form of a technology or a pseudo technology based discussions also. One must understand over here is that at least today's AI algorithm, AI technology is usually data-based technology. So as far as biological aspects are concerned, we require a tremendous amount of a data input to come out with a proper justified output from an AI algorithm. And that's going to be the key, because right now, what we are talking of a biodefense, biosecurity, biosafety, people are having their own data in their own cocoons. Until and unless there is not going to be a data sharing, the AI algorithms will not give you a correct results. That's what I feel at the outset out over here. There are a lot amount of false signaling, which is also happening as far as AI models are concerned. If I'll slightly deviate over here, you look at the armed forces. Armed forces are using AI technology right now only in training and logistical purposes. Nobody is even thinking of using AI in a combat zone. So people definitely understand that there are a lot amount of limitations, at least at this point in time, as far as AI technology is concerned. So from a bio point of view also, if you want to use AI, I think in the training, in understanding the basic things, one has to start at that level and not directly get into some sort of a weapon generation by some other entity by using AI models and all that. We need to understand what is actually happening. But at the same time, from a proactive point of view, AI should be used with some amount of deliberations and due diligence. Other than that, I think I've already made a point about tabletop exercises. Here, I would like to just make a point over here is that why I'm saying tabletop exercises is that because we need to have a bottoms-up approach to understand these issues. If you do some amount of policy making that A, B, C, D, and this is the way the inspections will happen, some sort of ideas which will be floated by various working groups, it's not going to work. you need to have a bottoms-up approach. That means right from involving scientific community and finally taking a policy decision on those aspects. This is what I will say at this point in time. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Many thanks to you, Ajey, for that. I think it's a really useful point on the data as well. I think somebody once remarked to me that our history, or indeed histories of past biological weapons programs, is not always very good, filled with gaps and spin, among other things. Amanda, perhaps I could turn to you now for AI or your closing remarks or anything else you'd like to raise. Please, the screen's yours.
Sure. So with the AI question, I want to acknowledge my limitations up front, that I'm very much not an AI expert, but I would just throw out maybe 2 examples of possible ways that we might be able to use that technology. One is identifying that some sort of violation of the convention has taken place, particularly an attack. I think one of the challenges that we always grapple with in that space is you've got a lot of people who are potentially going to be exhibiting different symptoms, or, you know, potentially an attack may not necessarily look the way that we expect it to. It can be very difficult to distinguish that from something that's naturally occurring. And I think my understanding of kind of where AI models are is that those can be really useful in identifying some of those anomalies and putting data together to suggest that perhaps there's something out of the ordinary going on. And then the other sort of opportunity that I would flag is related to attribution. So there's been a lot of work, I know, on using AI for forensic medicine and pathology, and there might be ways of sort of building on some of those advances in order to facilitate faster analysis of samples or being able to analyze and look at genetic data in the event of an attack. So I could see it potentially being useful there. Again, I'm not an expert, but I do want to sort of express my appreciation for the question, because I think a lot of the time we can get so caught up in the ways that these technologies may be complicating the threat, and we don't always do a great job of thinking about the opportunities that those technologies present in terms of combating the threat. So I really appreciate the questioner reminding us that there is another side to that coin. And then my closing thoughts, I just want to say that I'm so encouraged by the amount of energy around this discussion. Clearly, it's something that is of great interest and always has been to a lot of states parties. And I'm very excited that it seems like we can really channel that in a positive direction. Again, I think a step-by-step approach is going to be really important. We need to keep in mind we're not going to be able to accomplish everything all at once. We're not going to be able to jump straight into a brand new instrument next year. And so I think a certain amount of realistic ambition is warranted. But I think from what I'm seeing from states parties, there's clearly a lot of energy, a lot of excitement about these issues. And I feel really hopeful about the prospect of channeling that in a positive direction right now. So thanks.
Many thanks, Amanda, and thanks for closing the panel with a positive, enthusiastic, and almost optimistic manner. So much appreciated. Apologies, colleagues, we've not been able to hear from Leifan so far. Leifan Wang, I'm not sure what has happened here, but what we will do is invite Dr. Wang to see whether she'd like to submit any comments in writing, which we can then perhaps upload to the event page. But I'll check with my colleagues and follow up on that, and certainly hope everything is okay with her. Our time is coming to a close on this event, so I'd now like to turn to give nearly the final words to the friends of the chair. And I think first on our list is Ambassador Robert in Den Bosch of the Netherlands. You have the floor, the screen, Ambassador.
Thank you, James. Good morning, good afternoon, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Let me first thank our speakers for their contribution to today's excellent discussion, and as well also thanks as well to UNIDIR and UNODA for organizing this webinar and for inviting me to share some closing remarks. I also would like to thank my Mexican colleague Alonso Martinez, who has worked tirelessly with my delegation in his role as co-facilitator on compliance and verification to make the most out of this very challenging and complex topic. Last but not least, I would like to thank the chair of the BWC Working Group Ambassador Flavio Damico for his ability to guide state parties through discussions on a large variety of topics, including compliance and verification. Having said that, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, let me now try to capture the main takeaways of today's discussion. And as explained by several of our panelists, rapid advances. Sorry, there was a slight introduction. As explained by several of our panelists, rapid advances in science and technology offer new opportunities. Undertakings that were fast and costly only a few decades ago can nowadays be done in a fraction of time and with a limited budget. But nothing, indeed nothing, is for free. These developments are promising and offer opportunities in various fields of human endeavor. However, they also increase potential for nefarious purposes. And precisely because these developments are so rapid and so difficult to predict, in my view, this webinar once again underlined that the world has to keep up with the latest scientific and technological developments, both on the concerning aspects as well on the promising ones. This sense of urgency is not theoretical. The COVID-19 pandemic abruptly reawakened our collective realization that biological threats left unchecked can have devastating effects all over the world, regardless of their origin. Luckily, our focus is more narrow than all biological threats. Our deliberations take place under the BWC. As one of the classical WND treaties, the BWC stands out in one respect. Unlike the Chemical Weapons Convention, as was mentioned, and the Non-Proliferation Treaty, the BWC is not equipped with a verification mechanism. This is not for lack of trying. In the 90s, state parties studied the issue of compliance and verification in detail, but could not reach consensus on a possible instrument or relevant measures to implement. Today, the results of that historical discussion need to be understood in their proper context regarding technical and scientific developments, stakeholders involved, and uncertainties. Furthermore, the rapid developments in science and technology that we have discussed today have significantly altered the threat landscape since the 90s. At the same time, those same developments offer new techniques which can give insight into compliance with the convention, in addition to those already identified by earlier work. As we discussed among state parties during the working group last December, these possible new opportunities should be studied further. It should be assessed in what ways they can complement, strengthen, or replace measures identified in the past. At the first glance, this might sound like a straightforward task, but let me assure you that the BWC will require tailor-made measures. After all, the scope of the biodomain is unique compared to the nuclear and chemical ones, as was said also by one of the panelists. For instance, bacteria are able to grow, and the scope of the industrial application of potential dual-use bacteria is enormous. So although we can draw inspiration from other arrangements of verification, we cannot just copy-paste their verification mechanisms. And of course, I have now only talked about the technical question: can we verify the BWC? But there is also the underlying question whether we can reach consensus on strengthening the compliance with and the verification of the convention. This requires trust and political willingness. And let us not forget about how to fund any new arrangement in a sustainable manner. In other words, the way we summarized it after our discussion in December is as follows. Any future arrangement on compliance and verification should ideally be politically palatable, technological feasible, financially viable, and sustainable. Ambassador Damico already said it earlier. In closing, let me end on an optimistic note. Our discussions during the working group last December seem to me as being constructive and in good faith. Many delegations engaged on the topic, and there seems to be a broad willingness to press the accelerator. Today's webinar re-emphasized that impression. There's a lot of energy around. When we meet again in December 2024, later this year, To discuss, among other topics, compliance and verification, we will not only need to press, but to firmly hit the accelerator. I say that because by the end of the year, there must be clarity on what state parties want the working group to achieve. As friends of the chair, we will therefore continue to consult informally with state parties. This is also an open invitation to approach the facilitators, should you feel the need to do so. We are also in the process of organizing intersessional meetings to further stimulate thinking on the topic of verifying compliance, so that we can all come prepared in December. And I thank you for participating in this webinar, and I thank you organizing for really putting up an excellent show, if I may say that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. Optimism is always welcome, so it's a good way to begin to conclude this event. I'd like to turn, I'm conscious we are slightly over time, but I would like to turn to your co-friend of the chair, Mr. Alonso Martinez, who's a councillor with the Permanent Mission of Mexico. Alonso, the screen is yours.
Yes, thank you so much, Jamie, and congratulations to UNIDIR for organizing this event. I think, again, the UNIDIR is furthering the understanding and possible pathways towards an action-oriented goals of the working group, specifically on verification of compliance. Obviously, I join the previous statement read by Ambassador Bosch, and I also want to recognize the excellent guidance and leadership of Ambassador Damico, of which I feel honored to be a friend on the work ahead. So I think this seminar has been really useful, and there are elements that I have recognized from the meeting. I would like first really want to thank the excellent presentations by Una, Ajey, and Amanda. And I think from the elements I heard, I would highlight firstly a recognition of the substantive and productive discussions on verification and compliance on last December, and the expectation that such constructive approach will remain on the work ahead, recognizing that it will be very challenging. I think also it was highlighted that the reality of the challenges of the biological sciences today, including the experiences of COVID-19 and the incremental developments of science and technology, need a progressive pathway moving forward with regard to this issue. Third, it should be acknowledged that while the BWC should adapt to mitigate or contain the evolving risks of biological sciences, it should not do so in a way that impedes the legitimate, peaceful, and beneficial uses of biology. I think from the discussions of the three presenters, we could hear that any effective verification mechanism will need to balance the different purposes and objectives of verification. I think Una expressed it as detect, deter, and react, and the different visions that verification had, that were also expressed by delegations, with an adequate understanding of the existing and expected progress in the scientific-specific fields of life sciences, molecular biology, virology, medicine, veterinary medicine, pharmaceutical advancements, plant and animal sciences. I think here it will nearly be an understanding of the purposes and objectives of verification, but also of the specific field we're trying to verify and the different challenges that it brings. I think also from the three presenters, we can gather that it seems necessary to reach some kind of baseline on terminology and the understanding of threats, and from there identify what would be the most effective verification tools. However, as Ajey correctly identified, the verification mechanism is impossible to identify everything and everyone. So I think that's also useful lessons from here. The BWC should be able to use an evolving toolkit to make any eventual verification mechanism effective. So I think here it was identified AI and big data. Well, I think we've heard of other breakthroughs and the discussions with regard to microbial forensic medicine, nucleic acid sequence analysis, mass spectrometry, isotope molecular clock, biosensor technology. And I think here also it becomes particularly relevant what I think the three presenters said, which is the need to involve the scientists and all the stakeholders in the discussion to really have a broad overview of what we are dealing with and what are the possible toolkits that we might have. I think we also heard today, and I think it's consequential with the December discussions, that there would not be a single measure of assurance of compliance with the BWC, but it would need to have a set of measures to avoid loopholes. I think Ajey said it, but I think it was in the spirit that scientists will need to think out of the box, take experiences of other regimes, but acknowledge the particularities of the biological field. I think we also heard today that there are clear interlinkages of the topic of verification and compliance with a broader agenda of the working group, including national implementation, international cooperation and assistance, scientific and technical mechanism, or some format of whatever nature, as Una mentioned, CBMs, and also were discussed. So obviously there's a clear interlinkages with all those aspects. So finally, I would like to highlight what's mentioned by Ambassador Damico in his initial statement, in which we need to build a common and shared vision through a precise pathway. And understanding, as Amanda reminded us, that we won't be able to do everything at once. And the pathway should recognize that verification in any disarmament treaty is a complex process based on three pillars: sound scientific understanding, political will, and appropriate legal and institutional crafting. And if any of these pillars is weak, the structure would not be stable and would hardly fulfill its goals. So I think these are obviously elements that, as friend of the chairs, we value enormously from this event, and we will certainly plan ahead with Ambassador Damico on further work ahead towards December discussions. So thank you so much.
Many thanks, Alonso. I am conscious we're running over time, but I did want to give the final word to Ambassador Damico. The screen and the floor are yours if you'd like to take them, sir.
Thank you so much. I mean, my very brief remarks, just to send a personal note of appreciation to Ajey, to Uma, and to Amanda for their presentations. I think that they highlighted a number of points that we deem very relevant and important. A very good endorsement of our step-by-step approach, and also some very good ideas like the tabletop exercise. And other aspects that we should be aware of, including how not to have a too broad approach for verification and compliance, being mindful of political circumstances, but also not try to do it in a too narrow way so that we might end up being falling prey to path dependency, which is something that we also need to avoid. So as Alonso just mentioned, this balance between science, political will, and a solid legal framework is clearly required, and this is not going to be achieved in just one go. I think that we have to try to be realistic and try to advance in a very broad front and with pragmatism and counting with the endorsement and support from all quarters. So I think that this was, again, a very successful webinar, and I wish to thank you again, Jamie, for putting it together.
Thank you, Ambassador. I'm very conscious of the time here, so before closing down this, I'd just like to alert you to an online feedback form that we have. This will only take a couple of minutes to complete. It is anonymous and it can help to identify ways forward. In particular, please do let us know what you think could be done to improve these events, and we'd also welcome ideas for future topics and speakers. That would be appreciated as well, so please do fill that in. I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank all of our speakers today. Thanks to our UNODA colleagues, to the Friends of the Chair, and also the Chair, of course. But I'd also like to take the opportunity to thank those colleagues who are working behind the scenes on the production of this event. So Maria, Clarice, Luison, and Luisa, thank you very much for all your help as well. And of course, thank you to all of you participants for taking the time to join this event. We hope to see you again. We will have future events in this series, so please do watch this space. And with that, have a good evening, have a good afternoon, or have a good day, depending on what time this finds you. And thank you very much.